Hi, I'm Dr. Lariscy. It's nice to meet you. I will be giving you some video lectures to go along with the readings that you're doing for the course. Some of them will be in my office. Most of them will be in my classroom where I teach a traditional classroom, and as I lecture the assignments that you'll be reading, I will record that. And that means that they won't be particularly professional videos, but you'll be able to hear them. They probably won't be very flattering or from a very good angle, so don't look too closely at them. But I do think that seeing my expressions and my gestures will help you hear me better. So we're going to do videos rather than audio, and this will be your lecture. This first lecture I'd like to do is something that I often do in the traditional classroom, where we can have a discussion, and I ask students why we read. And I just did that with the traditional classroom again. And many of the answers are common throughout the years. It's important to get a handle on why we're reading, what I think the function of reading is, so that we understand the significance of what we're doing in the literature classroom. Inevitably, one of the first things that students say is that we read for entertainment. We read just for the fun of it, and that's true. And when I'm talking about reading, I'd like you to think about what you like to read, but also what TV shows you like to watch, how you like to gain information. And gradually I'll take us closer and closer to literature and to good literature when I'm thinking about these functions. But good literature can be read just for fun. Others say literature is for fantasy. We read to escape. And not necessarily in the fantasy genre where things are not realistic or where things are futuristic, but just to live in a different world than the one that we live in, or in someone else's life. We read to escape our own lives. If you look at some of the things that America is concerned with now, looking at contemporary media, you can see that we really don't do a lot of imagining about princesses and princes anymore, about castles and heroes on white horses. Although there are a lot of individual characters who save the day, and that is a very American notion of that one individual who's going to save the day. But most of the time they come from some underdog status. They're not already kings and queens. They're not born presidents. They are made into presidents from some have-not situation, and that's a good American story. You'll see it played out over and over again. So we read for fantasy, and one of the fantasies that Americans have is a rags to riches story, that if we work hard enough, we'll be able to come out of the poverty into which we were born into prosperity. And we have all kinds of short stories, novels, plays, movies, and particularly autobiographies that try to make that point. Unfortunately, it's not a very true story for the vast majority of Americans, that just if we work hard enough, we'll be able to become wealthy. And over again, as the century continues that we're looking at here, mainly the 1900s, that lie will be brought to the surface of the American dream. And so one of the reasons that we read is so that we'll know about facts, we'll know how the world is. Rappers are not the first people to say we need to keep it real, we need to know about reality. In fact, realism as a genre, it begins to be a very important category for American writers in this time period, as you'll see when you read your introduction, and as I cover in the next video, which highlights for you what you need to look at in your introduction. So we read to know what's going on in the world. We read to understand what reality really means. But what do we do with that knowledge? We become better people, but we also become better citizens. And sometimes if we're reading, we read to identify with the characters so that we know more about ourselves. We know who we are like. We know who we like. We have experiences beyond our own. In fact, there was a fantastic study that came out in 2013 that said people who read good literature, as defined by American professors or literature professors, good based on a professor's valuation of good. People who read good literature are more empathetic than other people and do better in social situations. So there's some science that proves to you that reading literature can make you function better in the world. I knew that. Now we have some proof. And if you look again in the next lectures, you'll see how Americans began to be very concerned with scientific proof over intuition or emotions. But when we get this knowledge and we know, often we begin to know about other types of people who are not like us, and often those people have some sort of need. They are marginalized in some way. They're minorities. They're poor. They don't get to vote. They don't get paid as much. Their access to the American dream is limited in some way. And therefore we identify with them as Americans, and we identify with their rights to achieve the American dream. And if that is limited in some way, then we witness to their hardships when we read. And most often we are motivated to help bring about change. And that protest literature is a very common kind of literature that begins to be published throughout what we call American literature too, from 1865 to the present. And so I argue that we read to be entertained, we read to identify, and let me go back and say that often the people that we identify with lately are not very good people. We are not identifying with that stock hero. Far from it, we're identifying with the anti-hero. Hamlet in the Elizabethan era was the first anti-hero. He had a tragic flaw. He couldn't quite achieve what he had as his potential. And we have a lot of famous anti-heroes in literature today. The most recent ones come from TV, and they come from Dexter and Breaking Bad, where we like to identify with people who are main characters who fall from grace, who don't make it. And so that brings up another aspect of American literature that becomes very, very popular, which is psychological investigation. Nothing happens in American literature very often because we're delving deep into the psyche. We become fascinated with what makes people tick, and we read to know how other people think and how other people feel, and to look at other kinds of psychological cases. And this gives rise to a kind of writing called stream of consciousness, where Faulkner and others will write how people think, which is nonlinear, which goes back and forth through time and all around in different perspectives. And we begin to be fascinated with the life of the mind. And so you can read 4 pages describing a flower in D.H. Lawrence's work. And we're more interested in the mind than action. So we read to uncover those things, and then we're left with Dexter, the anti-hero, and the main character of Breaking Bad, who started off good and then went bad. And what do those things tell us? And the answers to those questions, you know, because you've watched these series, I'm sure, will stand you in good stead when you ask yourself, why am I reading this a short story by Ambrose Bierce called Chickamauga about the Civil War? Or why am I reading this novel by Louise Erdrich about Native Americans in the Midwest? And so keep those things in mind as you answer for yourself. What is the function of American literature? How does it work? What is it for? And what happens to you as a citizen when you read it? Bear witness to it and probably want to help things get better.